Week 13 running back tier list. This is where we go through everything that you guys need to know to set your running back lineups in fantasy football, from usage to injuries to recent trends to who has a good matchup. All that stuff will be covered in today's video. If you guys enjoy, if I helped you set your lineup, least you could do is leave me a like down below. Subscribe to the channel. If this is the first time you're checking us out, you're going to want to stay tapped in from now till the end of time, because we're going to be having you covered very soon with 2024 prospects and all that good stuff in the offseason. So with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, so let's get things kicked off with the running backs you will not be able to use this week. We're going to start it off with the bye week running backs: Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, James Cook, Gus Edwards / Keaton Mitchell, Deontay Foreman / Roschon Johnson / Khalil Herbert, and Alexander Mattison and Ty Chandler. So 6 teams on bye this week. So after this week, we're definitely going to want to be stashing some players for the fantasy playoffs, and I did a video on that yesterday if you want to make sure to check that out. Then we have the will they play tier. So these are the running backs that are dealing with injuries this week. All 3 of these guys have already officially been ruled out. We don't have a lot of injury question marks, thankfully. We do have one, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But in the will they play tier, we have Jonathan Taylor, Kenneth Walker, and Aaron Jones. Kenneth Walker obviously ruled out on Thursday night. He's already out for the week. It looks like he could return in week 14. We did actually see Zach Charbonnet get banged up in the week 13 game to the Cowboys as well. Jonathan Taylor is the most recent running back casualty at the position. He is having thumb surgery, which should knock him out for the next 2 to 3 games. So it looks like we're going to have Zach Moss in our life yet again. And then Aaron Jones, yet another game missed for him. Hopefully you guys didn't buy low on him earlier on in the season when, he was an injured 30-year-old running back with a hamstring pull, and he's basically just had a lost season so far this year, kind of similar to what we saw with Keenan Allen last year, where he gets one injury and then they start to stack up and he just can't ever get healthy. So it looks like Aaron Jones will be out this week and probably out potentially next week. I don't imagine any of you guys that have Aaron Jones are probably making your fantasy playoffs, but we'll have to wait and see there. So let's get into the actual tier list itself. The locked-in running back starts, my running backs 1 through my running back 12. I basically just kind of gloss over these guys, talk about who has a good matchup, high-scoring game environments, and bad matchups, maybe highlight a guy or two here and there. The guys that have good matchups in this top tier, we have Raheem Mostert, Bijan Robinson, Zach Moss, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, and Rashad White. Some of the guys in high-scoring game environments: Christian McCaffrey, Raheem Mostert, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Alvin Kamara. And then some of the guys that have bad matchups, so we maybe want to downgrade expectations for these guys. We have Christian McCaffrey, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, DeAndre Swift, and Alvin Kamara. Like I said, some of those guys are in high-scoring games, but some of them have tougher matchups, particularly Kyron Williams against the Browns and DeAndre Swift against the 49ers. You guys get the picture. So I do like to highlight a guy or two from this top tier because, we got recent usage, and particularly with this top guy, we do have some injury question marks. So my RB4 in this top tier is Travis Etienne. Definitely keep an eye on his health because he has been a limited participant in practice the last 2 days with an upper body injury, and they play on Monday Night Football. So we do still have one more practice report to get an official word on Travis Etienne's health. He should be fine and good to go because he has gotten some practice in, and I'd imagine he'll be a full participant today. But keep in mind that his snaps have declined in the last 3 games, and we've seen D'Ernest Johnson carve out a role. And the Bengals' run defense is very exploitable, as we've seen from the Steelers running backs last week against the Bengals and the Ravens running backs the last 2 games against the Bengals as well. They can get it done. Travis Etienne can get it done against this defense, but if he's dealing with an injury, maybe we see a little bit more of D'Ernest Johnson. Either way, make sure to stash D'Ernest Johnson for this week and for going forward because he is one of the better handcuffs in fantasy given the offense that he plays in. Running back 10 in my top tier here, I also want to highlight is Zach Moss, who's a newcomer to this tier. He is back in our lives now with JT on the mend with a thumb injury. I remind you, all the way back to weeks 2 to 5, when Zach Moss was the starting running back of this team, he had 3 games of over 20-plus PPR points as the lead back for the Colts. Of course, most of that was with Anthony Richardson, so the offense has changed a little bit, but volume alone makes this guy a top 12 back in a top 10 matchup against the Tennessee Titans this week. So with Zach Moss, this game has sneaky shootout potential. He's getting the volume. The over-under is 42.5 points right now with most of the steam on the over. So I really do like Zach Moss. If you guys picked him up off of waivers or if you were stashing him on your bench, he is a guy that I would throw right into my starting lineup this week as a guy that projects for like 13 to 18 PPR points per game. My running back 11 to close out this tier that I wanted to highlight as well is Kyren Williams, who again is a newcomer to this tier because he was back in our lives this past week. Of course, he posted a whopping 38 fantasy points in week 12, assuming the lead of this backfield in the Rams backfield. He is getting all of the work under the sun. He played 40 snaps in what was supposed to be like a limited game for him, and he played against the Arizona Cardinals, who are horrible against the run, and he's actually done this to them twice now. But last time I checked, the Cleveland Browns are not the Arizona Cardinals. They're one of the best defenses in the league, so I downgrade this spot for Kyren Williams, although his workload would dictate that he probably is a top 5 to 8 running back this week. I have him at RB11. So moving on to the high-end RB2s. So these guys I go a little bit more in depth with, talk about their usage and all that good stuff. Running back 13 for me in my rankings is DeAndre Swift of the Philadelphia Eagles. 47.5 point over-under for Swift and the Eagles offense. Swift is definitely great. The issue is that the Eagles offense has had its ups and downs recently, and the 49ers are the type of defense that you don't want to run against. So the type of defense you want to throw the ball against, and they're pretty good at defending fantasy running backs. So Swift could still get there due to the scoring environment of this game and the volume and the usage that he commands, which is typically what I like to lean on, which is why I still have him at RB13. So he's just outside of RB1 range for me, but the offense that he plays in, the usage that he has, and the type of scoring environment that we have in this game still propel him as a great play. Running back 14 for me in my rankings is Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. The Packers defense is an exploitable top 16 run defense for Isaiah Pacheco and the Chiefs running backs, and the Chiefs are implied for 24.25 points in this game. So good matchup for Isaiah Pacheco. It's a good game environment. Great recent usage for Isaiah Pacheco, as you guys can see on the screen there as well. He's getting more of the routes and more of the targets in addition to the role that we already knew he had, which is that he's the primary ball carrier. He's going to get most of the red zone and the goal line work. We're actually seeing him work in a little bit more into Jerick McKinnon's workload where, he's getting some targets and he's getting some routes. 51%, 40%, and a whopping 68% of the routes the last couple of games, peaking at a 79% snap share last week. So good news for Isaiah Pacheco. He looks like he's going to be a great play going forward. Running back 15 for me in my rankings is Javonte Williams, who has the 6th easiest matchup on the slate, fresh off of a game, too, where he played 71% of the snaps. He's actually played against some really tough matchups the last 2 games, so I wouldn't be too worried about the fact that he has 7 and 10 PPR points, because Cleveland and Minnesota, his last 2 opponents, are both top 5 run defenses in the NFL. So this week, he actually has a favorable opponent to do some damage against. Going up against the Houston Texans, they're a top 6 matchup for fantasy running backs. He is definitely the type of guy that you need in your lineup. My number 16 running back is Ramondre Stevenson, and I just mentioned how good Javonte's matchup is. Ramondre's is even better. He has the 3rd best matchup on the slate. The Chargers are 26th against fantasy running backs, and Ramondre's usage, since I traded him in my home league, frankly irritates me. So shout out to you guys if you're Ramondre Stevenson managers, because I just did you guys a solid back in week 5 when I traded him. Since week 5, when I traded Ramondre Stevenson, he was coming off of 2-point, 6-point, and 7-point fantasy performances. I trade him away in week 5, and since then, he's the RB6 in fantasy points per game, posting 18, 15, 7, 23, 13, and 22 PPR points. So isn't fantasy football fun? Isn't it fun when you trade away a player and he decides to go off? That's pretty much been my worst trade of the season so far, because Ramondre Stevenson has been really good since I traded him away. But regardless, he is a great play this week if you have him on your roster. I just had to rant a little bit because I traded away a guy who's been basically a high-end RB1 since I got rid of him. So RB17 for me is Jaylen Warren, who is actually my start of the week in week 13. Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris have the best matchup on the entire slate. As I talked about with Kyren Williams, the Arizona Cardinals are awful against fantasy running backs. Kyren Williams has gutted them twice. Singletary gutted them 2 weeks ago. Bijan gutted them 3 weeks ago. Like, they are an awful run defense, so the Steelers running backs are really well set up to have a great game. To me, it's just free cash, so I am making sure that Jaylen Warren is in my lineups if possible. He is my start of the week as my RB17. And then closing out this tier of running backs, I have my RB18, which is Breece Hall, who is coming into this game questionable, which is definitely worth noting. He did practice in full on Friday, so I'm not convinced that he's going to be out or anything like that. But just such a bad offensive situation here in New York. Just when we thought it couldn't get worse from Zach Wilson, we get Tim Boyle, who, in my opinion, I have no idea how he's employed by an NFL franchise. This guy's one of the worst quarterbacks I've ever seen. It's a solid matchup for Breece Hall, but with that quarterback and that offensive line, you have to basically hope that Breece Hall catches 7 checkdowns and busts off a long run, because it's literally all he can do. He has no help in his offense right now. It basically is just whatever he can do with the ball in his hands is how many fantasy points he's going to get. His offensive line's not blocking for him. His quarterback's not doing him any favors. He barely gets any red zone work because they're never in the red zone. Not a great situation for Breece Hall, but I do think he has to be in your lineup as a top 20 running back because he's just simply that good. So low-end running back 2s tier. We kick this off with Zach Charbonnet, who has already played this week. Despite the bad matchup, he gets there because he scored in a high-scoring affair, and it's another feather in the cap for the hierarchy of why we make start sits. A lot of you guys comment on these videos like, why would you start this guy over that guy? And, this list is terrible and stuff like that. The reason is because I favor things like usage and high-scoring game environments over good matchups and bad matchups, because as much as matchups can factor in, usage and high-scoring game environments are the most predictable and the most sticky thing that we want to stick to. So with Zach Charbonnet, the reason I was starting him as a top 20 running back was because he had good usage and he was on a high-scoring game, and he paid off at 16.9 PPR points per game. Running back 20 for me is David Montgomery, and this Lions and Saints game also kind of has the fantasy trifecta right now. It's a 47-point over-under. The Sharps are hammering the over, and it's one of the fastest-paced games on the slate. So I want pieces from this game, particularly pieces from the Lions, because they're implied for over 25 points in this one. And even though David Montgomery has failed to crack over 40% of the snaps in the last 3 games, he's getting touches when he's out there, and we know he has a very good shot to score given the type of usage and the type of role he has for the Detroit Lions offense, who is one that's very good and one that is in the red zone pretty often, although Jared Goff has played pretty bad as of late. I think they can get back on track against the Saints this week. So my running back 21 in my rankings is Devon Achane. Achane is going to play according to head coach Mike McDaniel, so I don't really want to start him because I'm concerned with how much work is he actually going to get. I think he's probably going to be on a pitch count of some kind. It's a great game environment, don't get me wrong. The Dolphins are implied for nearly 30 points, but if Devon Achane plays 25% of the snaps, I think everybody's going to be disappointed that they played him. So I'm playing it safe this week. If you guys have Achane, I'm ranking him RB21. I think he's a fine option if you need to start him, but if you have better options like a Jaylen Warren or a Breece Hall or something like that, I don't think it's a must-start option that you have to throw Achane out there just because he plays for the Dolphins and they're implied for a lot of points. I'm pretty concerned that he's not going to get his full workload. Unless we hear otherwise before Sunday kickoff, I'm ranking Devon Achane conservatively here at RB21. So RB22 for me in my rankings is Najee Harris, and it's the same exact rationale as it was for Jaylen Warren. And honestly, the matchup actually affects Najee Harris more because he's the guy that gets most of the rushing carries. So the fact that the Cardinals are horrible against the run actually benefits him more than it benefits Jaylen Warren, because Jaylen Warren's been pretty good against every defense. So with Najee Harris, he's actually been pretty productive this year. So especially in recent weeks, he's been pretty consistent. So I could throw him out there as a top 24 running back. My running back 23 in my rankings here is Devin Singletary, and he has been outstanding the last 3 games. We saw this backfield get shaken up a little bit. With Dameon Pierce coming back this week, he missed 2 or 3 games. I can't remember how many it was, but he played just 19% of the snaps. So we'll see how much the backfield changes. Maybe Dameon Pierce is a starter long-term. Maybe it's Devin Singletary, but I think my guess is that this is still Devin Singletary's job until I see otherwise. This game also has a 47.5-point over-under, which I actually forgot to mention, for Javonte Williams, and the Texans are implied for 25.5 points of that 47.5-point over-under. So the Broncos defense, not very good against the run. In fact, they're dead last against the run in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. A lot of that came earlier in the season when they were really bad against everything, running backs, wide receivers, whatever, but they still are exploitable is the major point here. So with the Texans offense, I want pieces of it, and Devin Singletary should be an option that can get there either in the red zone or get there through the receiving game. We also don't have any Dalton Schultz in this game, so maybe that helps him out to get some more receiving targets. My running back 24 closing out this tier is James Conner, and he has not been as good as I thought he was going to be once Kyler had come back into the fold. Last week, actually, his snaps really plummeted in favor of DeMarcado and Michael Carter, but I'm pretty sure that was mainly due to game environment. I mean, the Rams were blowing their doors off, so I'm pretty sure that, James Conner was just taken out of the game because they were losing and they were getting destroyed. But I would like to see James Conner have a good game here against the Steelers. The revenge game narrative might come through here despite the bad matchup against a pretty good defense. James Conner, of course, used to play for the Steelers, so I'm sure he wants to have a good game against the team that let him walk in free agency. So my flex plays tiers, we have running back 25 for me is Joe Mixon, and I said this would happen, and of course, everybody probably expected this to happen as well. Mixon's lifeboat is now gone. There is no Joe Burrow in this offense, and without Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon is exposed as a bad running back because he isn't very good. 8 carries for 16 yards is exactly the type of piss performance I'm expecting going forward. That's what he had last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's strictly a volume play. The reason you play Joe Mixon is because you could probably get 15 to 20 touches per game out of him, and against Jacksonville, they're a strong run defense, and I don't really expect a whole lot of fireworks in that game in general. So Joe Mixon, strictly a volume play, not somebody I'm really excited about playing this week. If you guys especially need really big performances and you need big wins, he's more of a floor play in my opinion. So running back 26 for me here is Jerome Ford. The Rams are a strong run defense, so Jerome Ford is essentially Joe Mixon this week. You don't really want to play him. The nice thing that we do have for the Cleveland Browns offense is that Joe Flacco is starting. And at least in my opinion, I think that's a slight upgrade to the Browns offense in general because Dorian Thompson-Robinson and PJ Walker just simply aren't very good quarterbacks, and they're not going to propel the offense forward. I feel like one of the big takeaways from this Browns game might be why the hell didn't the Jets sign Joe Flacco when he was waiting on the street when Aaron Rodgers went down, because I actually do think that Joe Flacco is going to keep this game competitive, maybe even outright win this game for the Browns. They are, the better team record-wise as compared to the Los Angeles Rams. So this one should be interesting. Jerome Ford could get there based on, the fact that he gets like 66, 65% of the overall opportunities for this backfield since Nick Chubb has left the lineup. Running back 27 for me here is Brian Robinson, and this has been the same story all season with him. When the Commanders have a chance to win the game and they can keep it close, I like Brian Robinson. But in this game, they're 10-point underdogs against the Miami Dolphins, and they have a chance to really get boat raced and really get their doors blown off, and that's why I really don't like Brian Robinson this week. But it's a man matchup, and it's a bad game script. Sam Howell tends to keep the games a little bit closer maybe than we expect, but we saw from the Cowboys game last week that it can really unravel quickly. So I'm not a huge fan of Brian Robinson this week, although if you have him and you need to start him, I don't think he's a horrible play. So running back 28 for me on the week is A.J. Dillon. And with A.J. Dillon, he's had a number of games now with Aaron Jones out of the lineup that have been good volume-wise. And I have them highlighted on the screen right now in week 2, in week 3, in week 5, and in week 12. But it's not been anything crazy fantasy point production-wise. The Chiefs are not an easy defense to run against. So I'm ranking Dillon down here as like a high-end RB3 because we also saw Patrick Taylor randomly play about half the snaps last week, which is really concerning for A.J. Dillon because pretty much all he has is volume when Aaron Jones is out of the lineup. He's not a very good player. He's not very efficient. He's not going to give a whole lot of receiving production. So if Patrick Taylor is going to work in this much, it's probably not going to be a very good situation for A.J. Dillon. So running back 29 for me is Chuba Hubbard, and Chuba Hubbard had a great game last week, 20-plus PPR points, but he runs into one of the fiercest run defenses in the league in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. So if the Panthers are able to move the ball on offense, and maybe firing Frank Reich is a big contribution for that, then it's possible that Chuba Hubbard can get there. But I'm not overly excited about him. He's just kind of like a volume play with a little bit of upside. And then closing out this tier of running backs, we have Dameon Pierce. He's not really that good of an option. He actually would be like a tier down from the guys that I've talked about with Chuba Hubbard, but it is a great game environment, like I said, with Singletary earlier. And what if Pierce was just eased in last week? What if he plays 40, 50% of the snaps, gets most of the carries this week, and actually gets there because he is the Texans starting running back? So I'm ranking him as a borderline flex option, but I'm not overly excited about him. And then 5 of my deep league flex plays, all of these guys are really committee backs that you could talk yourselves into. You might have to dig deeper with some of these guys because, we have 6 players on bye, 6 running backs on bye this week. Tajay Spears, Kareem Hunt, Samaje Perine, Ezekiel Elliott, Tyler Algier, and Antonio Gibson. Again, all of these guys are in committees. All of these guys are the second running back in their committees, but they do have some upside given their matchups, given their receiving ability. So if you need to start any of these guys, this is the order that I would start them in. So if I helped you set your lineup, as always, leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. If you want to check out everything else that we're doing bonus content-wise, check out flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSC for 30% off. We do have a new video going up there live talking about dynasty trade targets at every position. So if you guys want to get ahead of your league mates and, make some trade targets at the end of the year here, definitely go and check out that video. That is exclusively only for Flock Fantasy subscribers. So if you want access to it, you will not get it for free on YouTube. We have one bonus video every single week going forward for Flock Fantasy subscribers only. And you guys can get access to that, like I said, by signing up. Link down below in the pinned comment. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.